Why is wealth inequality such a hot topic for really a lot of people that politicians never talk about? And it's private equity. Because I was just reading this book, The Holy Grail of Investing. Oh, it's reverse on the camera. But I just read the first chapter and I kind of wanted to go through why that is what it is, basically. Because I saw this shocking graph on here in the book. From 1987 to 2023, how much do you think private equity went up compared to the S&P 500? Well, if you had a small fund in the S&P 500, you would have gone up about 10%. So that would have gotten you, over that period of time from 1987 to 2023, 26 million of compounded interest from $1 million. Guess how much private equity got? 140 million from a $1 million investment. So the baseline of what a fund would have started like. And what's even crazier is that they still made money in 2008. So even when the entire market crashed and people lost their jobs, they still made money. But how does it work? Because that's really the truth, and that a lot of people say is behind wealth inequality, but it's not really that, as it is the system to get into private equity, which is really what I'm gonna make the case for, and that is that private equity does increase the wealth disparity, but not just because of private equity, but because of the system behind it. Well, how do you get into private equity? You need to be an accredited investor, which means you need to have $1 million worth of investable assets, and the US government lets you become an accredited investor. So that means just to get into the game, you need to be rich, to get even richer. But now in 2020, they made a thing where now you can become an accredited investor if you have your series licenses, which basically allows you to use other people's money to then go into private equity, which is probably the only way to really get rich in this country from investing now. Yes, you can do it from compounding of the S&P 500, and it's gonna keep going. And I think for everybody who needs to invest, you need to go into the S&P 500 even in those market downturns. But the problem is that there's an entire private side that absolutely beats you out of the water in everything. They averaged in private equity year over year 16% compounding. So yeah, if you started with $1 million in 40 years, you would have had $136 million, because the $1 million starting point is what you would need to be an accredited investor, which is an entire crazy system in and of itself, because you can only get to be an accredited investor if you're over $1 million in liquid assets. Make it make sense sometimes. It's crazy, but really I think more people need to know that you actually can get into private equity, and it really, on the individual level, it's impossible. But on a group level, on a macro, if people pull enough funds in, and say for example I was a fund manager, I could technically start my own fund and use everybody's money as an accredited investor to then put everyone's money into private equity, and then I could return it back. And I could technically do that for the public. But why doesn't it happen? Because it's such a lucrative industry, that's why. Because they charge upwards of a 5% fee, But guess what? They can make you like 20% in a year or more. So that 5% fee doesn't do anything because your gains still beat everybody out of the water. Even in 2008, they made more money for you than the fees they charged. That's insane. And the fact that some of those banks got bailed out by the US government is a whole nother story. But I mean, I kind of set out on a mission to make private equity for everybody because really it's starting to become a thing that really anybody can invest into. And it's not because there's limited access, which there definitely is. It's just nobody has come together to be able to achieve something because everybody's focused on themselves. And the problem with a capitalistic society like this, if everyone's taking for themselves, well, then you start to realize that what happens when all the limited resources are owned? Well, now the value has to go up because now everybody is the top dog competing for the same spot, like in a real estate market, like in Chicago, for example. Prices are only going to rise up because there's so many people that could live there that they have to drive each other out with price to be able to compete. And it's an unfortunate reality, but we can actually come together instead of focusing on me, the individual. If everybody actually came together in a sense, like we create a fund and now we invest that and the interest compounds, really, that actually helps people because I mean, what sucks is there's like a $250,000 or something crazy minimum investment. But if there was some way to be able to get anybody who wants to be able to put money into a private equity fund, it doesn't have to be much. It could be less than $1,000 and just let that compound and make monthly contributions. I think that could really change the world and bridge the wealth inequality gap that really started because there was all these minimum investment things that you could only do if you're already rich, which is kind of crazy. I don't like some of the system stuff, but really I think private equity could be for anybody. I just think it's just so lucrative for the people who already have the money that they focus on themselves more than everybody else around them. And the thing is that it's not capitalism that's the problem, it's human nature. But the thing is that people can actually come together to make change, but what sucks is that nobody talks about this stuff, especially now, since as an individual you can become an accredited investor without having $1 million, and you could actually have the ability to pool people's money. And yeah, you gotta be a good salesman, like obviously you gotta have to start doing these things. I mean, I'm starting my career in sales and I'm becoming a financial representative. So for me down the line, it's only a good idea to get my series licenses, which then I could apply to be an accredited investor. And then I can help people who may not be rich right now, but can later, to make money. And that's what I think is so unfortunate in these finance industries, that they look over the young audience. They say, oh, the college students, they don't have any money, we don't need to help them. That's crazy. Because just imagine if you pulled up a large amount of college students, even if they put just a small amount of money into this fund, and you give them equal representation in the fund as the money they would have paid. Well, now you just set out on a mission and you have an insane amount of money to basically invest it into private equity or something, and give these young college students insane returns based off of principles that have been really making the wealth inequality gap bigger. But I think really to make it smaller is to give everyone access to the same wealth building tools. And the problem is that people in the finance industry only focus on wealthy people after they made the money. But what about before? Because everybody has to start somewhere, right? And man, I really think private equity could be for everybody. what sucks is the system in place that really has that ability to change if people come together and really change it. I just think it's unfortunate. But I'm gonna change that. For me, it's starting to share with people really how that's even possible. And yeah, I might be crazy for making this idea, but what if it actually happens? I'd rather think like an entrepreneur than as a pessimist. Because yeah, if private equity continues at the rate it does, eventually they run out of customers. Eventually they run out of the market. Because compound interest is so powerful that eventually it gets dangerous. Because think about it. If somebody has all the money and they're getting dividends on that money and they use the dividends to reinvest, the guy who was already rich is only going to make more. But how is that possible? Well, it's because they got there first. But how can you give access to everybody to be able to do that? It's by rewinding the clock and going back and helping the person before they were wealthy. Well, how do you do that? Well, it's with college students, young adults like Gen Z right now. They're pretty much screwed in the job market because of the insane cost of everything. But if we taught them how to make, like me personally, this is what I want to do, is teach people investing. And it's only going to happen if you make private equity access to everybody, or at least different types of investment funds that aren't this annuity insurance crap that, yeah, might get you like 4 or 5% because they just put it in T-bills and stuff, or however they do it. Or they might put in the S&P 500, but they give you less because they charge you an insane amount of fees. I'm on a mission to make investing for everybody. That's my thing. I kind of just wanted to make this video to really share what I read in The Holy Grail of Investing by Tony Robbins. He makes a good case about private equity and how people actually got rich. But how do you help people before they get there? It's financial literacy. And it sucks they don't teach it in college, so I'm going to do it for you. And talking about how private equity works is one way to do it.